Hi, I'm Shana Meyerson with the Yoga of War podcast, here today with neuro and clinical psychologist, Dr. Orli Petter. If you appreciate and find value in these important discussions, please consider supporting the show so I can continue to bring you such amazing and esteemed guests. Details are pinned in the comments below. So, brutal savagery is a feature, not a glitch, of Hamas terror. So when the diabolical atrocities of October 7th were live streamed across the internet by Hamas themselves, the world watched on in abject horror and was shocked to the core, but no one paying attention was surprised. What did surprise and deeply disturb most people beyond the wokeosphere was how the social justice warriors decided to rally behind Hamas after the massacre, rather than behind the innocent Israeli victims who had just suffered the most horrific one-day murder of Jews since the Holocaust. And as if glorifying terrorists as freedom fighters wasn't enough, the river to the sea contingency took it one step further, drowning the West in a tsunami of genocidal antisemitism, calling for a global intifada revolution and attacking Jews in our streets, our subways, our schools, and our synagogues. How did this happen? Has society learned nothing from the lessons of the Holocaust? Today, Dr. Orli Petter of the Israel Healing Initiative will explain the psychology of propaganda and how empathy is not immune to manipulation. Powerful forces can hijack it into violent hatred, using methods grounded in science. Orli Petter, PhD, I could have just said Dr. Orli Petter probably, is a clinical and neuropsychologist who has served as a professor of psychology and a consultant on terrorism research at the Rand Corporation. She specializes in the intersection of trauma, neuroscience, and propaganda, with decades of experience treating survivors of war, terror, and mass violence. After the October 7th attacks, she launched the Israel Healing Initiative, bringing neuroscience-based trauma treatment, including advanced neurostimulation, to survivors in Israel. Her current work explores how extremist propaganda hijacks the same brain mechanisms used in trauma therapy, particularly emotional arousal and memory reconsolidation. Not to heal, but to implant narratives that inflame and destabilize. These campaigns re-traumatize survivors and train entire populations to react with outrage that serves the propagandist's very aims. Orli.
Intense.
I'm thrilled to have you on the show today. I've learned so much from you, and I'm looking forward to educating the audience as well.
I'm so happy to be here. This is the first time I'm really going to speak in detail about some of these issues. So, and the science keeps advancing, so there's always more and more to add. So I'm really happy to be here.
And I appreciate how you are at the forefront of this research as it's unfolding. So there are a lot of people who like to spout the knowledge that they regurgitate from their YouTuber du jour, but you're the one who's actually doing the research, who's actually doing the work and coming up with the theories. So I really, really appreciate it, and let's get into it. So today we're going to be connecting the dots, okay, between massive anti-Semitic brainwashing that we saw in World War II and the pervasive anti-Semitic brainwashing
Mm-hmm.
that we've seen across the entire globe post 10/7. As we dissect the psychology of the war for our brains, so much of what we find lies in this complex process of empathy. So, to frame our discussion for the audience, what is empathy?
So, when we speak of empathy, at least when neuro people speak of empathy, there are two different, we call them, neural ensembles. There's two different kinds of activations in the brain. Sometimes people shorthand it as networks. There's emotional, and then there's cognitive empathy. And usually when people talk about empathy, they talk about emotional empathy, which means that you're feeling the same feeling as someone else. So your body is activated. It's an embodied feeling, and it's represented in your bloodstream, in your heartbeat, and in other, sensations. And that's emotional empathy. Cognitive empathy is that you have a model. Most of what our brain does is forms a predictive model of the world around us. That's how we operate. So I know, for instance, on a very banal level, like my glass right here is just, a foot away, and I know exactly where my hand is going to go to pick it up because I have that model. And we do the same thing with humans. And this is what we call cognitive empathy, or sometimes it used to be called theory of mind, where we have a predictive model for, if I say this, this is how this person is going to respond. So one thing I wrote about for the Jewish Chronicle was that younger people don't tend not to have as solid model of humans, especially because they're new in the world.
Right.
And it takes a while. You have to keep, as you predict things, you have to keep refining it. And so it takes a while until it gets closer and closer to perfection. And, what we saw, for instance, during the Hamas war, certainly the last one, but also I saw them in the wars before as well.
This isn't anything new.
It's not since 2009 I've been seeing it. Is that the cognitive empathy model, meaning the model that young Western people have for what jihadists are, and who Hamas is very loose. It's not filled with enough detail and content. So that would be something that we would like the emotional empathy track to be able to be integrated with. So in other words, during this recent war and during all of the wars since 2009, what we saw was an overwhelming, curated onslaught of imagery that is, goes straight into our emotional empathy. I'll just call it that for short. And ideally, we want our emotional empathy to be, as it oscillates back and forth, to be able to go back into our model of who this person is, what is, to be able to analyze, to be able to sequence, to be able to look in a broader context, to be able to look historically. All of this has to get woven in for us to be able to make good decisions and good actions. If the emotional empathy track, I'll just call it a track for shorthand right now, is overwhelmed, we don't do that.
Okay, I want to get into the sticks of all of this.
Okay.
We're going to break it down like bit by bit, okay? So what's interesting about what you just said, what sort of sticks out for me about this projected modeling is that in the world, I think that most people think of empathy across the board as a very good thing.
Right.
But what I'm hearing is that cognitively empathetic modeling can actually be used for very nefarious means to manipulate, because it means that I can strategize. If I say X, your empathetic, emotionally empathetic reaction will likely be Y. So maybe cognitive is sort of the dark side to the emotional empathetic that most people in the world, the general guy on the street, would refer to as umbrella empathy.
Well, I mean, all of these are just processes in the brain that can all be used for nefarious means or for humanitarian means. And each one of them can have the mask of humanitarianism on top of it. And it's still being used for nefarious means.
Right.
But, to your point, Hamas actually, I'll be more specific. Islamic Jihad one of the top persons in charge of the propaganda for Islamic Jihad, which is part of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, was captured. And in his interrogation, he point blank admitted to having very sharp cognitive empathy, meaning that he understood what made the West tick. And he understood that everything that they did in English needed to be put into humanitarian framework so that it would entice the Westerners on their side, so that the bulwark, any kind of suspicion would come down and it would hook into brain networks that we have already formed to be kind and to be, empathic and all of these other things for, kindness, for humans.
I have the quote actually written down in my notes that I was going to get to later.
Okay.
Again, I want to first get into just the science of this for a minute, and then let's get into what's actually happening. Because I think, like, when I was listening to your talks and reading your papers, as somebody who's already aware of the broader concepts of what's going on with these propaganda campaigns, which I've talked at length throughout these podcasts, what's interesting to me is really the science and the psychology and how it's being literally just used against us. So I want to just take a few steps back, and I promise I really want to get into the sticks on what's going on.
I'm happy to talk. I love talking about this science, but I'm just also trying to be cognizant that the audience, I'm not sure.
100%.
Yeah.
And when I say sticks, I mean toothpicks. We're going to make it as like, as, brain digestible as possible. So here that people adapt or adopt over time has some sort of Darwinian value to it.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, so what is the evolutionary role and significance of empathy? Why empathize?
So emotional empathy, I'm just going to qualify. Emotional empathy, the reason I think that it's lauded, not just in your field, but also in my field, in psychological therapy, for a while, and maybe still in some circles, it's worshipped as, this magical tool. And there is a certain, quote, magic around it. There is.
Yes.
Because what it does, when we feel for someone, we are connected. And we, like I said before, it's embodied within us. I can go through the boring science. I'm happy to do that about how that happens. But that is what happens. And what it does evolutionarily is it bonds us with our tribe who we need to survive.
Does it create the tribe, or does it bond us with the tribe that's already there?
It bonds us with a tribe that is already in our mind. So first, for family, we're going to feel more for our family that's hurting than for someone across the street. And we're going to feel more for someone across the street generally than for someone
across the world.
Yes. And a lot of people don't understand that, because I see all the time on the internet people saying, there's so much coverage that's going to, on CNN, which is an American news station, about what's happening, some disaster that happened in America, but not as much of a disaster that happened someplace else. That's the way our brains are hardwired, for a reason, because we need our tribe to survive. It's hardwired also in us that The tribe doesn't have to be just family. It can be a political tribe. It can be Democrats versus Republicans. If that is how,
Sure, you identify.
if that's where we're identifying, we already have, the neural connections in there that this is part of our identity. So it expands. That definition expands. But because of that, that can make empathy very, in some cases, racist.
Okay.
Because if our identity
right.
is with
Got
whatever our racial group
Right.
is that we're identifying with, we're going to feel more for that
Right.
than somebody else. So it gives us these skewed, it's not a force.
It's tribalism.
It's a tribalism.
Okay. So I guess that what makes me chuckle inside, I always say it's funny, not funny, is that you're saying this, and in the very first sentence you said, because I said, is this the tribes that we're already a part of, or does it make us into a tribe? You said the tribes we're already a part of, and you started with, we're going to care for family more than strangers. We're across the street. We're going to care for the person across the street more than across the country, the person across the country more than across the world. How do we fit the Jews for jihad in that model? Are you saying that choosing a political tribe will actually supersede at that point? I'm talking about somebody.
No, it's a great question.
Right. And I just want to qualify. I'm talking about somebody who actually respects their parents and, consider themselves like these kids at Columbia, as a Jews that actually feel like they're connected on that level. How does that fit in the model?
So, this hasn't been measured. So you're just asking my opinion right
yes.
now.
Your informed opinion.
But I think, and people certainly react this way, that they have a stronger identity with something else other than being Jewish, whether it's with being, progressive.
I'm not talking about Jewish. I'm talking about family. I'm talking about your parents, your grandparents, your heritage, your great-grandparents, your cousins, your sisters, your brothers.
Well, but still, you're identifying with your family. And there has actually been dissertations about this when they've looked, for instance, at religious people. Why do some people break from their family tribe?
Right.
Into something totally different. And religious people like to think it's for some other reason other than what these dissertations were showing.
Okay.
Which is that there was some sort of breakage that happened sooner. Usually it's some sort of, in these cases, it was a traumatic event, whether it was abuse within that tribe, which caused, and it was never healed, which caused a breakage from the family tribe.
Okay.
But then don't forget, when people are in their 20s and they're off to college, and in our country, they go far away off to college most of the time, they form a new tribe. And especially at that age, that is a prime age for new tribe forming, especially intellectual new tribe forming, because the frontal lobe is still pruning and reorganizing.
What does the frontal lobe do?
It does a lot.
Okay.
It does a lot. But one of the things that it will be doing is finalizing, not ultimately finalizing, but doing a lot of work also in organizing who you are and how you fit into the world, what the world is and what I am. Okay.
And so in this model, it sounds like your college family supersedes your family because they are the people you live with. You've only lived with your family your whole life. Now you live with this new quote unquote family. How does the model fit with people who grow out of it? Hopefully this generation will. I have my reservations about that. I don't think they will for various
my reservations
reasons
too.
but let's talk about the hippies of the Vietnam era. So many of them went on to be millionaire capitalists. I was just young and stupid. Our generation and generations before us talk about young and stupid a lot. How do we break this model, or why would it be broken in order to move past that new tribalism?
Well, as somebody who is old enough to be in the wake of the different generation, not actually hippie, but in the wake of that generation, I knew many influential hippies.
Okay.
And fought with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you from my experience from those leaders, they did not break away from the core values. They may have made money, but that's not a core value. The value
hold on, that's not accurate. A lot of them were anti-capitalist. They were fighting for socialism, just like we're seeing now. So I wouldn't say they weren't. They were very bent on anti-materialism.
No, but you're saying that was a core value?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there were different subgroups within the hippies.
Okay.
So the ones that I knew were more the druggies, and like Tim Leary and Ken Kesey, and they may have gone on with making money and such like that, but they kept their belief that if you just loved, if you just gave everybody, these substances, these kinds of things, then there would be an opening and there could be world peace and this kind of thing. And I think it actually helped. This, again, is not scientific. This is just my own observations and experiences. I think it may have helped get us to where we are right now, that we think we can deal with some of this terrorism just by understanding and loving and opening up more empathy.
That's right. And Israel, I don't want to be flip when I say they learned it the hard way, but if you look at Israel pre-10/7 and the number of people who really did believe there was a pathway to peace, probably half the country, definitely all the people in the South, and then post-10/7, it went down to almost zero. 95% believe like kumbaya is not going to solve this problem. And listen, I all other things being equal, I would love to just hug my neighbor and make everything okay. Again, war is not a glitch of existence. It's a feature, right? We as humans are born with a certain level of what would you call it? Of
aggression.
Aggression, contrarianism, whatever it is, towards others. That's part of the egotistical man of looking out for yourself in a world of finite resources. You could define the resources however you want, whether they're theoretical or physical. We, unfortunately, as humans, are programmed and born on some level into conflict. And so to say that, maybe I've never touched a drug in my life. Maybe if everyone had psychedelics and you could somehow get into every single person on earth, maybe world peace would come out of that. But short of that, there's definitely a very big piece of reality missing from that concept. Agree?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
I'm not sure I agree with the part that if everybody took LSD, that there would be, because you'd have to be on LSD all the time. That's artificially changing the way that your brain functions.
Sure.
So you're not exactly having a regular human brain at that point.
I'm talking about a completely false society made up in my brain at that moment about a world. What I'm saying
but it's a mistake that lots of people make, that they'll make it like the religious fundamentalists of most religions will make the same thing. If everybody just believed as me,
right?
If everybody just did these drugs, if everybody just,
accept this God,
had empathy, if everybody just had empathy. Empathy. There's always if everybody just did, but the whole problem is everybody just doesn't.
Yeah. So you're drawing here an interesting line, which you mentioned earlier, between trauma, empathy, and let's say personal growth, that we have to have these elements to have the self-awareness to decide who we are and or who we want to be. Is that fair and accurate to say?
In general, yeah.
So I guess my question is, obviously we haven't all experienced, acute trauma in our lives, right? We all have trauma, but there's varying levels of trauma, right? I'm not going to have the same trauma as somebody who was brought up in an abusive household, for example. So I'm curious if people who have experienced acute trauma in their lives, particularly in their formative years, are more susceptible to experiencing extremely empathetic behaviors.
So, the data's a little mixed on that, but we'll see how it clears out.
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell you that in my working with survivors, this is what I do. And after October 7th, I set up a nonprofit called Israel Healing Initiative to go and help the survivors who have tremendous PTSD. Every single one of them has empathy, emotional empathy that's off the charts and beyond what they had before the trauma. The way that they feel for human beings, at times I've wanted to get down on my knees in just awe. It was almost beyond human. It was almost godlike, how you would think of godlikeness. So, there are pathways where that can occur. I'm not sure whether you can make a general statement about it.
Okay. I'm going to guess.
But I can tell you this, that, it's very easy to manipulate someone when they're highly activated with emotional empathy for various reasons we can get into, scientific reasons we can get into. Simply stated, I will simply state them.
Yes.
But women are more prone to this in general, if we're going to make generalizations, than men.
Okay.
I think that's important.
It is important. The male brain and the female brain definitely have absolute unique features that differentiate how we respond to the world. But so actually that leads me right into my next question, is that back in the day, right, we used what we now call social justice warriors, we used to call bleeding heart liberals, right? And I want to know, like, so is there, it sounds like there is like a direct correlation between like political liberalism and susceptibility to emotionally empathetic manipulation? Or how about just emotional empathy in general? Are people who are the bleeding heart liberal social justice warriors empirically more empathetic than others?
I think you could make a case for that. I think you
Okay.
could make a case for that, yeah.
So does that sort of explain why, like, the left, which has so many rabidly anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic elements in it right now that are being exposed, but the people on the left, like, they fall all over themselves to insist that they are not anti-Semitic, wherein on the right, the anti-Semites are like, yes, we hate Jews. They just put it on the table.
Right.
So it seems like does that prove like this sort of political dichotomy, that maybe an empath is more likely to be on the left and a non-empath would be more likely to be on the right?
I mean, there's different pathways that I think are creating, are both, let me put it this way. There's all these political campaigns, right? And some of them are very well funded. And the ones on the left that can create anti-Semitism and can have lead our brains towards anti-Semitism, they are leveraging different vulnerabilities in our brain functioning than the ones on the right, but they end up in a very similar place.
Interesting. What's that place?
In terms of anti-Semitism.
Oh, I think meant in our brains. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are seeing what people are calling a horseshoe, which I would say is more like a circle, where there's the one thing right now that the right and left seem to agree on is we hate Jews. I'm talking about the far right, the far left. I actually would say in my diagram, rather than a circle, it's more of a hits the left in Jew hatred, and then there's a much larger, I wouldn't even call the far left segment of the left right now that has, I'm going to say, fallen for the anti-Semitic propaganda that bombards them every day.
I think that both the left and the right have their extremists. And I think the hijacking of the brains on both of those extremists, on the left and the right, is what is causing a big problem. They have a lot of similarities in the hijacking. And the people more in the middle are more amenable to actually being changed. Because, I call probably just in my musings, like I think of the people, the extremes on both the right and the left as having kind of like pod brains, kind of like from
Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Yeah, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Seriously, because you can see when the campaigns happen, they're already lit up. We call them kindled brains, highly kindled brains. They're already lit up. They're ready to go. And then the new campaign, every week during the Gaza war, every week there was a new libel that was happening.
Yeah.
And, you get like 4 or 5 leaders or a dozen leaders or podcasters or whoever, influencers, to tweet something the same or put it on the news or whatever. And then all of a sudden, all the brains go, woo, and they do the same thing. They get outraged.
Yes.
And at any moment, you can light their brains up. And those people on the extremes of both the right and the left, I'm not that hopeful for, being able to change for reasons, if you want it another time, we can talk about.
Yeah.
I think we're going to get more mileage.
Yeah.
Is more efficient to be able to talk to people whose brains have not been captured.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's just a few more toothpicks questions, and then we'll get into the specifics. Why is emotional empathy so much more effective than cognitive empathy in affecting our beliefs?
Well, I wouldn't put it like that. Okay. In terms of influencing people, emotions are always more effective in influencing people because our emotions hijack different parallel systems in our body and in our brain. And it's much more, we say like metabolically costly. It costs more energy, right? And to change it because it's a big force.
Okay.
So if you can, and it's pretty easy to hijack emotional empathy. It's not hard. It's not hard to do. But because, again, it's part of our survival to be able to protect our group. We can't survive. Well, humans don't survive on their own. We live in cities, we live in groups, like this is how we survive. It's essential. So it's essential for us to protect our other members of our tribe and to feel for them and to be able to get senses and to be motivated to help them if they are in some sort of distress. And pain empathy, there's different kinds of empathy, but pain empathy is very, very powerful. It activates our attention system almost immediately.
Meaning feeling someone else's pain?
Yeah, like when we see a picture, let's say, of a starving child.
Yes.
That is one of the most efficacious ways to get inside our body. And I mean, literally, it gets inside our body.
Okay.
And it gets inside our body without our permission.
Yes.
It's not something that we had to exert energy, like with reading. You have to exert a whole lot of energy to read. These are images, and this is something in reference to your question of how is it the same or different from the Holocaust.
We haven't gotten to that question yet.
I thought you mentioned it in the beginning.
No, I mentioned it before we talked. We're going to get into that.
Okay, I'll save it.
Yeah. We're going to talk about that later on. So that's super important stuff.
Yeah. But the imagery is, it comes in without our permission. I call it like the Trojan's horse of the brain because it comes in and we get activated. And once we're activated, ideally, what's supposed to happen is we see someone in distress, and that activates us. It's called the salience network. It comes in and it tells us this is really important. The amygdala comes in, tags it, and says, focus.
Right.
We want that to happen. But ideally, what's supposed to happen then, now we're supposed to oscillate to another parts of the brain that have to do with analysis. What's the cause of this? And all of these kinds of things that then will motivate us towards action. I mean, emotion just means to move. It moves us towards action. But what happens, and this is what happened in the Gaza wars with the propaganda campaigns, and it continues to happen outside the war, by the way. It's happening on all kinds of political campaigns. But we're just focused on this right now, is it's an onslaught of the same or similar images over and over and over again. So it overwhelms our brain with this heightened arousal. And this is it's almost similar to what happens lower grade when we're traumatized. We're overactivated. And when that happens, now we've got all of this activation going on in our brain. When that happens, it's drawing resources away from us to be able to do what the next step is supposed to be, which is to assess, to go into our cognitive empathy model, to look historically, to look contextually, all these kinds of things we're not as able to do as well.
That's amazing, because so we talked last week and about these topics, and you brought up to me the concept of like fast thinking and slow thinking, and this is obviously getting into those concepts. So what's ironic to me is that highly empathetic people are more susceptible to the fast thinking reactions of the emotional or pain empathy. But this is essentially the exact opposite of the mindfulness that they preach, which is stop, think, be non-reactive, right? So I'm wondering, is it accurate to say that emotional empathy hampers moral reasoning and judgment when it overwhelms our system?
When it overwhelms our system, yes, I think that's accurate. And, social psychology research was seeing this even before we could see it, in MRI research, where there were certain moral decisions that needed to be made, and I can give you examples, that would have saved more people if you make this certain moral decision, but people that were high in empathy and that were activated with high empathy would not make that proper, I don't want to say proper moral decision, but a moral decision that would save more lives.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I have this book, I don't know if you've seen it, called The Book of Questions, and it's all like, it's just a whole book of the impossible questions. Like if a train is going to hit 5 people, but if you hit a switch, it's only going to kill this one person. It's like, well, either way, I'm killing someone. And is it a baby? Is it an old person? Is it, but these are impossible questions. And so when you step back and say, it's not the right one, it's just that you would think that the inclination would be more lives saved is better, but at some point the judgment is clouded
because there's less resources going to those parts of the brains that can make judgments. That includes all the information that we talked about before. That's why. And those are the moral dilemma paradigms. They've been in existence for a long time. They have put people in MRI machines. And have them watch what happens in the brain, one or the other. And then they've compared it with people who are highly empathic and those that aren't.
Interesting. Yeah, I would imagine, like with someone like me, my mind would go crazy. I could think about one of those questions for days and not be able to land on a decision as if my life depends on it. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. So I'm wondering though, can this correlation work in reverse? if I have like really, really steadfast moral compass, moral reasoning, moral judgment, can this mitigate my susceptibility to empathetic manipulation?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so
For
it works.
sure.
Everything that we're talking about works both ways, because what you're saying is about oscillating between the empathetic / pain and the cognitive. And we just need a strong cognitive, empathetic base.
Well, not just, but that is because,
Mhm.
I mean, just if you just think of it biologically, as you're thinking and doing judgment and assessing and taking in context and nuance, which has become a bad word, but actually
Right.
it's only a bad word if you're on this side,
Or if you're sitting in front of a congressional panel defending your university, then it's
Yeah.
also a bad thing. But go on.
It uses resources, so it's going to pull away from an overwhelmed emotional empathy part. So it's not going to the emotional empathy is not going to hijack you as much, simply because the resources are more distributed.
Interesting. So let's get into the sticks. Okay. So let's get into this. You've done so much on this about the Islamic propaganda. Okay. So these campaigns that have been particularly magnified in the current Gaza war, they're not new, but social media, I would say with the advent of bots, has to be the thing that just made everything go crazy recently compared to previous attempts to make it go viral. These campaigns have been pervasive and also extraordinarily effective. So could we get into like, what are the strategies you started talking about before? What are the strategies that have been used to weaponize our Western emotional empathies against us?
The strategies have been, there are certain things that will activate us once we see them. First of all, the imagery is big, like I said before. Reading about it is not the same. It doesn't grab you without your permission.
A picture tells 1,000 words.
A picture tells, 1,000 feelings.
Yeah.
Even. Yeah. Can I put my foot up like
Do whatever
this?
you want.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's number one. So social media, all of a sudden, we're moving from text to images and videos. Also, the auditory system as well. Like, that's one of the systems, for understandable reasons. When a mother has a baby, you got to hear that cry, and you've got to be motivated by, oh my God, I'm tired. I have to. It's not a moral thing. I'm compelled to get up and nurse the baby. So there's these emotions, these emotional empathy that is really activated by vision and by, our auditory system. Those two things changed with social media, where all of a sudden there's an onslaught of this. And a baby as well, for evolutionary reasons.
Right.
So, during wars, for instance, if you want to talk about the Gaza war, there was a preponderance of baby pictures, of children pictures. Many of them true and pictures, some of them staged, and some of them from other wars, and some of them even from the Holocaust they were using.
Some
but
of them were victims, Israeli victims of October 7th, that they actually used and said these are Palestinian victims. I mean, so we could get into.
But the point is that it doesn't matter, because once you see it, you're captured.
Unsee it. Right.
You're captured and you're activated now, and you're in this place. We call it like a neurological window right now, because you're so activated. If you're overly activated, then again, you can't, access as easily the intellectual, cognitive resources, judgment, all that kind of stuff needed to assess it. But you're in distress. And so this is a time when you can insert the narrative. And usually, I'm trying to think how to say this outside of shop language.
Go ahead, use the shop language if you need to. I'll try my best to interpret it.
No, it's just, this is from social psychology. It's called an attributional search.
Okay.
And it answers why questions. The brain is so about answering why questions. Because remember, I said that so much of it is built around these predictive models. You're predicting everything.
Right.
So prediction means why. Why did this happen? And once you understand why it happens, then you can either make more of it or make less of it. So during this neurological window, now we're overly activated, not just activated, but overly activated. That's the key. We're not able to draw on our own intellectual resources as much. And now you get inserted the answer to this why question, that all of these dead babies is solely, it's not because of Hamas, firing missiles from the nursery or from the mosque or wherever, or the hospital. It's because solely of Israel.
That's the propaganda line. Yeah.
That's the propaganda line that you might not have accepted so easily if you weren't so aroused
Triggered,
by the onslaught of these images, because you want the distress to go down. And so the first thing is you want to understand why this is happening to prevent it, so the distress can go down. And so that's one thing that happens. That's exactly the same thing that we do in trauma treatment in reverse.
Interesting. Explain. It's funny, you told me that before, and I have been meditating on this statement. Let's try to unpack that just a little bit.
So in trauma treatment, first of all, you've got the trauma, which is this highly aroused brain. It can't function well. It's too aroused, right?
Okay.
So it does whatever it can to cope with that high arousal. It's stuck in that high arousal state. So it does whatever it can to stick with the high arousal. And when you go to someone who's traumatized and you say, oh, no, you did great. Don't blame yourself for this, or no, you're safe now. Nothing works. It doesn't take them out of their high arousal state.
Okay.
Right? So what we do in trauma treatment is we bring down their arousal so that they're able, but we give it a little tiny bit of arousal, because you want a little arousal. But they're so traumatized, we bring it down so that now they're able to access more of their brain. And then we insert these other narratives for what would have happened if you weren't there, or, to the left, and the missile came by, it shot by you, or the gun. A million of these stories that they were not able to take in when they were in that higher. What was it that made you arousal state?
Okay.
So we take their nervous system, we bring it down, and then we help them access all of these other explanations for what happened. This is a very short, simple version. What's going on with the propaganda campaigns is they do the opposite. They increase the arousal, and then when you can't access your own narrative about what's happening, or your own explanation, or your own knowledge about what's happening, then they insert at that point. And then they're paired together. And then it's repeated over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And we've got a whole new, ensemble.
It sounds like the propaganda structure is actually quite similar to a trauma cycle itself. In fact, when you're saying they arouse you and then penetrate, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is rape. Right? Like obviously there's the kind of rape that somebody, knocks you out in a park, but, I'm talking about like date rape and stuff. That's what they do. Like, it's like arouse and penetrate. So I'm not saying this to be funny or clever, but it's interesting how basically what's happening on purpose or on not, and you already alluded before, this is on purpose, is that they are, in this case, the propagandists are identifying our Achilles heel when we can't see it clearly, and then they cut it so they can't run away, so to speak.
What does the not run away mean?
Well, that's how you stop someone from running away, is you slash their Achilles tendon.
I see.
Sorry, that was a little bit too metaphorical. But that basically, that's how the ideological capture and then refusal to let them go by convincing them almost like a Stockholm syndrome. You like this. You actually like this. You like calling for death to people. This feels good. You like this.
Yeah. I mean, what can happen, I think what is happening is that through the and the insertion of a narrative while your own intellectual and cognitive systems do not have as much power, are compromised, it eventually starts spreading to other networks, including a network called the default mode network, which has to do with how we define our own identity. And also the people around us. You know, we start having these social groups, and now we have secondary, you know, adhesives that kind of keep sure. And then what happens, I think, is you get this symbolic morality. I think this is really interesting because we're seeing a lot of this. And I know you didn't want to talk about Billie Eilish, but
no, I did not want to talk. Okay. I just said she's not on my radar. But yes, absolutely, talk about her.
It's just a good example. Yeah. I don't want to date the podcast because this is just a current event that'll probably pass tomorrow. But we see like there's a lot of people who are mad at Hollywood, for instance. Maybe we should just expand it to that. Okay. That they're so out of touch, or the privileged. You know, there's the right wing will mock the privileged white woman who, you know, has all of this symbolic morality. They may call it fake morality. It's not fake, but it's symbolic. I'm going to call it symbolic morality. Okay. And I think there's a process of how this happens, because we already talked about how it is more likely to happen with women, with young people. So we've got young people and with women. Young women, they've got two factors going on. Or with people that are just highly emotionally empathic.
Which artists tend to be.
Right, exactly. So, but now they're in this cycle where they're activated all the time, and they need an outlet. An outlet for their own internal state. Right. I mean, I see patients in Los Angeles too, and people come in all the time, if not daily, saying that they're so upset with the state of the world. Yeah. There's a lot to be upset about, and this is a unique time in the world. But people look for, how do I manage this? How do I regulate these emotions? How do I put this and integrate this in my intellectual system? Now, people that are higher activated, and they may not be in therapy, or they may be with a therapist who's activating that more. Right. They are going to look for symbolic meaning, because it will release them emotionally from the intensity. Okay. So when, for example, when Billie Eilish says, we're all illegal on stolen land. What did she say exactly?
She said no one is illegal on stolen land.
On stolen land.
And by the way, notice how she hijacked the, like, excuse me, how she hijacked sort of like the catchphrase from the anti-Israel movement and inserted it into this ICE concept. This was very deliberate how they're using their narrative. But go on. Yes, that's what she said.
Well, she started off very anti-Israel soon after October 7th.
Sure, they're just co-opting. They just recycle, but go on.
You could say it's a co-op, but it's also the brain functioning now is already structured in this way. Okay. So it's just a natural development.
I think of it in yoga, we call it the monkey mind, jumping from limb to limb to limb. Like, oh, that's the shiny object. Let's talk about that. The Gaza. Oh, that's the shiny object. Let's talk about ICE. Oh, that's the shiny object. Let's talk about no kings. But we find that it's the same group of people who are in each of these tribes.
Right. I would say the shiny object is more for the right wing, which we haven't talked about yet. Okay. But I hear what you're saying, because there is some of that here too. But what I'm saying is that the mechanisms already, in terms of how the brain is functioning, is already set up for this. The only thing that's different is the content that's input. So it's a real natural evolution to go from Hamas to so many other groups that have been defined as oppressed groups. And remember, Hamas was defined as an oppressed group, that they were just, doing resistance
That's right.
when they slaughtered and dismembered children and elderly people and took them hostage. So, um, but what my point is that once you've got this system going, it needs relief internally.
Got it.
Because you're agitated all the time. You're seeing all these new things that now are easily, in my easily kindled brain now, easily flaring me up into high level of distress, higher level than it would have been a year ago. In fact, we can see when similar things were happening that people are upset about when they're happening 10 years ago, we didn't see the same amount of outrage. People may have been upset about it, but they may have done the different things to try to counter it.
Well, for about 10 years ago, I mean, it's happening now. It's happening in Iran. It's happening in Nigeria. It's happening, across the globe. It's happening in China. It's happening in Syria, if I didn't already say that. Like nobody really is paying attention. It's the low-hanging fruit. But I would also say that because they're so susceptible, you give them low-hanging fruit. They don't have to reach for the higher stuff, right?
Right. It's already in their
DNA.
I mean, at this point, it's architecture.
Yeah.
After all this amount of time, like these neurons have connected into something close to a network.
Yeah.
And that is defined now as whatever oppressed people are defined as, which Jews are not defined as that. So that's what can make the brain kindle. I'm just talking on the left wing right now.
Sure.
And so they need a symbolic release.
Yeah.
So any kind of symbolism, she was mercilessly mocked on the internet for this. I mean, it doesn't take much neural, resources to kind of think what this means. I even saw indigenous people online saying, look,
you're living
bad things were done to us. A lot of bad things were done to us. But our tribe, conquered the land from this tribe. So where do we start with the conquering? And if you want to give us back the land, we're happy to take it.
Exactly.
Like taking it. These are cognitive responses.
Right.
And it doesn't even take that much to have that level of thought. But symbolically, she feels good, and her supporters feel good because of the internal release of the distress. I did something symbolically now.
Right.
And if you go against that, it's going to feel as a threat to their system. You are now threatening their emotional equilibrium, and they will come at you, which is what, like her brother came on and started attacking. It's not an intellectual attack.
Right.
It's not a thoughtful attack about, let's have a discussion about it. It's just name calling.
Right. Playground politics is what we love in the world today. So let's get into specifically some of the propaganda. I'd like to actually look into a specific instance, the one that I think rocked the world more than any, which was the New York Times picture of this Gazan mother who was framed in a way that was very evocative of Mary Magdalene, and carrying or cradling, a baby who is very evocative of baby Jesus, This imagery was not an accident. Even though it might have been subconscious, when this is on the cover of, the New York Times, people look at this and they not only associate with Israel bad, but Jews bad. Remember, Jews killed Christ. Remember that thing? So this was and it was roundly debunked, which made no difference at all, because as you alluded to before and didn't use the exact words, you can't unsee it once you saw it. So can you just dissect this exact example, because it was so rife with symbolism and meaning, and it was so effective at turning people against Israel and the Jews.
You just, in terms of debunked, I think what you mean, if I remember correctly, was the mother was real, The child was real. These weren't doctored photos, but the child was ill, right?
Yeah, the child had a disease that had made
Yeah.
him emaciated.
Yeah.
It wasn't a lack of food, as evidenced by the mother who was holding him, who
Yeah.
looked well fed, and his brother that was standing there,
Yeah.
who was also well fed. So it would sort of, anybody really paying attention would have sort of begged the question of like, well, why doesn't she just give some of her food to her starving baby? And he wasn't starving. Yeah.
Right, right. And so you want to use that as an example of what happens there?
Yeah, the process of like why this photo, how it affected people, how it doesn't even matter if it's proven that this had nothing to do with Israel or a lack of food, and in sort of like walk us through that whole scenario.
So, I mean, we've already talked about like how it forms initially.
Yes.
And again, we're still sticking with left wing right now. I just want to mark that we're talking about left wing right now.
Right. And also, you talked to me privately about faces.
Yes.
And particularly, so I also like what is it about like just the totality of this specific image?
Yeah. So we're highly tuned to babies.
Mm-hmm.
A mother and her baby, highly tuned. Starvation, pain, empathy, like all of these things, they're loading up our system. And then the narrative around it that Israel is starving these children. And they're, I don't want to get into like how much starvation there really was. I think it was a little bit more than.
We don't have to get into logistics. Yeah. It was labeled as food insecurity, but that was hidden by everybody,
yes.
even though it was actually determined by the United Nations
yes.
themselves.
Yes.
On the same day that they wrote a report that there was no starvation, on the same day they posted on Twitter, on X, that X number of people were starving. And it was just like they hide their own. Yeah. But we don't have to get into any of that.
So the point is that once that gets activated, so you've already got like a system going, right? Once that gets activated, it has a life of its own. And excuse me for saying this, but Jews tend to be, especially Ashkenazi Jews, tend to be very intellectual, reasoned. They try to reason everything. This is what they do in the yeshivas. And they would try to reason people out of this. No, look, this is actually food insecurity. It's not food starvation. No, look, Israel's actually trying to bring in all these different, there's food that's rotting, inside of Gaza because Hamas is not letting people have it. They try to bring in all these things. It falls like water off a duck. It's not the way to go about it. When a brain system is highly charged, it can't take in these facts. It can't take them
among
in.
other things, its resources are being used up, consumed by this emotional empathy, this pain empathy.
That's right. And so it's not useful at all. And it doesn't really have an impact.
Okay.
Yeah. So
you can't argue emotions with facts.
When the brain is highly emotional.
Okay.
And this is loaded with emotion, loaded on very primal levels and religious levels, as so you adeptly pointed out. It really brings anybody that has, already, like if you think of these neural networks and even the ensembles as well, or at least the networks that are tied together, like eventually the neurons start forming its own structure together. It can be, when it's repeated, just a thicket of networks that come together, and then you throw in this little fact and you expect that that whole thicket to come down. It's not going to come down,
even if the little fact happens to debunk the entire thicket.
Of course. Yeah.
Okay, so
not in a highly charged brain. No.
In a sentence, in a highly charged brain, facts don't matter. I mean, because that's what it's coming down to. People are not concerned with facts anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be as extreme, but they matter less because they have less resources. I mean, excuse me for they have less resources for being able to access these kinds of things. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So one of the things that you want to do, and I think you have to differentiate between trying to change a person whose brain is already become highly kindled and already has networks entwined, around this, from just the public that are reading this information that may be somewhere in the middle, because it's very different. Facts may matter more to the people in the middle, which is more of the people, usually.
Okay.
But you know who does a nice delivery for people in the middle? Because the first thing you want to do for people in the middle is you want to calm down the nervous system.
Is it Sam Harris? No. Okay, who?
I don't want to say no. I mean, he's very flat. He's wonderful, and he can rattle off a lot of facts with a lot of context. He's beautiful.
He's very balanced, to do that. Like he's very good at sort of addressing,
because he sees the context. Because he sees the context.
Yeah.
I was going to say somebody who you've had on your podcast, Jonathan Tell me.
Oh, Jonathan Conricus.
Conricus.
I've had so many Jonathans on my show, and Jonathan Conricus.
Because you know what he does?
Yes.
He calms down the nervous system.
Yes, he does.
People will come at him, even on the
Piers Morgan
show, where they come at you, they rattle things off in order to activate your nervous system so that you can't access thought as easily. This is what scam artists do, by the way. This is how scams work. When they call you up and say, "Oh, I've got your daughter," this kind of thing.
Right.
What he does, he won't follow.
That's right.
A contagion effect of this kind of stress does not work on him. He's well trained.
Yes.
And he will just take his time, and he'll breathe, and he'll talk softly, and he gives it time for the nervous system to come down, the viewers, not the other people who are just, they get paid to be activated like that. And then he's able to insert facts that's going to be more likely to be received by the general non-captured audience.
Yeah. I actually had lunch with Jonathan when I was in Israel last time. And he and I were discussing exactly this, about how I could become more diplomatic the way that he is, because I am so undiplomatic and I'm so emotionally charged all the time. But we had this exact conversation. So I actually heard it from the Conricus's mouth. He's truly an exceptional spokesperson. I hope to see him as prime minister someday. But that's another topic for another day. So getting back on topic, so like morally upstanding people for 80 years now have been asking themselves, like, how is it possible that the Holocaust happened? Like, how were entire populations able to be brainwashed into this evil? And it sounds like you've explained already everything that has basically hijacked minds back then. There have been many experiments that have replicated this, and it works every time. So going back, or fast forwarding to the question that I hadn't asked, but I had asked you before we got on the air, why don't we talk about what are some of the similarities and the differences between the way the Islamists are using propaganda today and the way that Hitler used propaganda in the Holocaust era? Obviously, we've got the force multiplier of the internet. I don't really want to put that in because that's not a constant, that's a variable. But the actual techniques, how are they the same? How are they different? And how have they been so successful? Well, you've pretty much talked about why they're so successful.
Yeah. I think, there's so many things, but we can focus on some of these neural things. During the Holocaust, of course, we didn't have the imagery as much, right? We didn't have videos. We didn't have these photographs, these images coming at us all the time. You had to read. Or, we were just starting to have the films, but then you had to like go to the theater to see them,
Right.
right? So it wasn't an onslaught of imagery. They had to do it what we call the slow way when we talk about slow and fast way. So the way you do it the slow way is it's just a constant, it's also a barrage, but it's a constant barrage again and again of thoughts. Oh, you're in distress? Now, keep in mind, there was distress there. So the brain is already activated, like what we're seeing today. Even this is, we're kind of going into the right wing right now. You know, you've got this disenfranchised population. They're losing jobs, they're losing money. You know, many of the followers are from these disenfranchised groups. The same in Hitler and Nazi Germany. You know, there was tremendous economic insecurity. So there's distress. So you already have a little bit of activation of the brain. So naturally, organically. And then through repetition, the slow way, again and again, oh, your distress is due to the Jew. Oh, your distress is due. And it's a constant over and over again. So you start forming these new connections again that, oh, if I want to get rid of my distress, this is who I get rid of.
Okay.
So then you get, I call it the where. I probably should think of a different name for this, but maybe not. You can tell me what you think of it. I call it the Where's Waldo.
Okay.
Remember as a little kid, did you read those?
Sure, of course.
Where's
You have
Waldo
to find
books?
him in the...
And so you look for Where's Waldo.
Okay.
And then you get this, you know, first this dopamine rush and, you know, a little bit of norepinephrine, blah, blah, blah. And then there's this release. Like,
Oh,
like,
there he is.
you know, and then you go to the next one. Well, you've got some of that going on the right wing and also in Nazi Germany as well.
Okay.
Where you have, where's the Jew? Like even with the Epstein files released, there's all of these, you know, emails and mentions of Russia and so many other countries. And as soon as Israel is mentioned,
There's
it's the Mossad.
Jew.
There's the Jew.
Well, Epstein also.
Yeah, but in one of the emails, Epstein said he hates Israel. And he was against Netanyahu's, you know, and all this kind of stuff. So, but yeah, I mean, that's the point. It's like find anything that looks similar to what I now have in my brain functioning is the cause of my distress. And I feel, again, it's like also a symbolic relief, like, oh, I found it, you know, now I'm better regulated for a moment.
I think Where's Waldo is a good analogy.
You like it? Okay.
Yeah, keep it.
Where's the Jew? Where's the Jew?
Funny, not funny.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, it's sad that we have to be having or even chuckling about these concepts because, I mean, it's very depressing. It's very depressing that these are our realities. And I know, like, as Jews, one of our primary coping mechanisms throughout history was vaudeville and in joking and comedy and in satire and parody because the world is so bizarre that, but it's bizarrely evil in this instance. And, you know, it's sort of in our nature to make light of it. But I think sometimes going back to when you said that, like, the survivors of October 7th, are some of the most empathetic people that you've met. I think that it goes to, because now they have experienced what we can only conceive of. And they have been on the conceptual end of my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, my uncle, whatever, went through the Holocaust. I heard the stories. I never really got it. Now I lived this horror. I get it. Now I get it because I lived it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's more integrated. Can we go back to
anything.
Eilish?
Yes.
And I don't mean to pick on her. She's probably a very lovely woman. I'm just using her as a symbol of this kind of group that gets a lot of mocking.
Okay.
Normally what we would want, if we have to go to a symbolic morality to ease our distress, normally what we would have is we would have an experience of the consequence of if our empathy does not have enough accuracy in it in terms of, you know, the kind of conception that we formed of what it means about the pain empathy that we were just activated with. So normally if someone has a ridiculous idea, it gets checked. It gets checked in the world. Right? Like, oh, wait a minute. That belief just caused me distress. Like, I didn't lock my door because I believed that if I could just love, everybody, no robbers would come or whatever. Now I've learned that's not a good way of being. And so those two systems in our brain connect and integrate, which is healthy. We want the integration of threat system and our, emotional empathic system and all of these systems that we're going for integration. When we're in a privileged class, we don't always get that integration because we're insulated from the consequences of our beliefs. And they stay at a symbolic level. And so we can hold these ridiculous beliefs that...
luxury beliefs.
The luxury beliefs. Yes, the luxury beliefs. Right.
Interesting. So I guess that the other thing that bothers me so very much is that, like, in World War II, forget about World War, in the World War II era, right, there was no precedent, okay, for the systematic genocide. Sorry, I have an itch in the middle of my back. Of 6 million Jews, right? So
no, but the Armenian genocide happened just before, and it inspired Hitler, actually, that he could get away with it.
I don't think that the general populace had enough time to absorb this information to say this is happening again. But I want to stick with the Jews for a minute here, because the Jewish question has been like the pervasive. Sometimes it's hard for people, like you said, where's the Jew? Like, it's hard for people to even draw parallels between what happens to Jews and what happens to anybody else. It's just the whole narrative is rife with double standards. And to this day, I disagree fully, but most nations do not consider the Armenian genocide to be a genocide. Now, I 100% believe that it was, but I think there was a very different narrative around it back then. This was also the era of nation building and in sort of defining who you are, and then it was the breaking down of empires, right? At the time, you had the Ottoman Empire. They're still, in their... Anyway, I don't want to get into that. So anyway, so 80 years later, okay, we have generations of education and of hindsight. The world has had more than enough time to learn about and process what happened in the Holocaust. Like, there's no plausible deniability at this point for repeating these very, very blatantly anti-Semitic patterns. I'm wondering if you think that the people who are calling for intifada revolution, who understand that it means kill Jews wherever you find them, do they lack the self-reflection and awareness to recognize their own transgressions, their own behaviors? Or do they recognize it and justify it through some sort of empathetic reasoning?
I mean, I think there's different types of people within that group. Okay. There's the leaders who know exactly what they're doing. And then there's the followers, some of who have a taste of it.
I'm mostly concerned with the followers, yeah.
So some of the followers, they're young students, they're of the privileged class, because you're finding more of these followers actually in the wealthy Ivy League schools, not just because there was more propaganda, more money from Qatar and all of these nations that supported Hamas, but also you're getting them, like I said before, at that age where their frontal lobe is just, solidifying in terms of its organization. They're much more susceptible to propaganda. And they're getting propaganda, both emotional and also the cognitive propaganda, to kind of keep it in place. And so, yeah, many of them think that this is part of the oppressed class. It is a symbol. It's gone into a symbol at that point, because when they actually meet a Jew, it might be harder, depending how entrenched they are, to react that way. But it's a collective group, and the ideology is imparted that way as a collective group. And this is, an oppressive, they're oppressors, and sorry, not sorry. Sorry that there was a massacre, if I even agree that there was a massacre, but you guys had it coming.
Okay. I fully understand what you're saying. I just, again, like, I guess my problem is, can they not see that this is exactly what happened in Nazi Germany? The rabid masses calling for death of anyone, quite honestly. But let me take this one step further, because what I don't understand is that if empaths are the people who are the most susceptible to emotional or pain empathy, right? Wouldn't they also be the least likely to buy into? But wait.
Okay.
I'm not saying the oppressor oppressive. I'm talking about genocidal hatred.
No.
But how can somebody who considers themselves an empath on any level say, yes, kill them all?
Because the way that emotional empathy works, and this is even before we had MRIs, there were studies on this. Let me put it in a way where you can even laud that it works this way.
Okay.
I'm a father. God forbid. I see my daughter being raped. I have so much empathy for my daughter, like as close as it can get. I want to kill that motherfucker.
Excuse my French. Yes.
I don't care what happens to him. Let him burn in hell.
Yes.
Right? That is where intense empathy will take you. Empathy for people in your group, and utter not only anger, hatred, or murder of the other side, who's not in your group, who you feel is attacking your group. But there have been studies that have been done on this. You're even willing to cheat for your group and believe it's the right thing to do if they've activated high empathy in a group.
Okay, so let me play devil's advocate here. How many times have we seen parents, or you could argue particularly mothers, who have said, I mean, we just saw this with Erica Kirk.
Yeah.
I forgive the person who killed my husband, who raped my daughter, who stole my car, because, they needed it more. They were driven to it. I live in an oppressor class. So I would say that doesn't always hold. I mean, you're talking about a father, but so what if it was an overly empathetic mother in the same situation?
Well, to use Erica Kirk as an example.
She never says, let's kill the mofo.
I know, I understand.
Yeah.
But, that's why I'm always trying to get you to kind of not say everyone.
I'm talking about emotional empaths. Yeah.
So, what it takes, it's noble in a way, to some extent. To every extent, it's noble to be able to marshal the other resources in your brain, to not have the emotion take over when it's so high. It takes a lot of energy.
Okay.
A lot. To override the intense emotional energy, to put a bulwark on there and say, wait a minute, let me put this in context. Let me think about what the long-term repercussions are. Let me think about the historic repercussions. To put all that into context and to say wherever it was that led you. For Erica, that's where it led her. Now, sometimes people they'll go to the same shortcut. They'll say, I forgive. There was somebody, I think, what magazine was it in? She had written something about she had been raped.
Yes. Oh my God, that was so offensive.
Yeah.
I was sick reading that story.
Yeah.
That she was raped by an Islamic, I don't remember what nationality, but that she could understand it because it was in his culture, and we have created the space for this to manifest, and she didn't blame him. Yes,
Right.
it was truly
So
offensive.
you can get shortcuts to the same place, and it doesn't mean that you necessarily marshaled all of your intellectual, everything, all the resources we talked about to be able to come to a conclusion. She may or she may not have, but people oftentimes, more than likely, they take these symbolic shortcuts, which is what I was arguing, the privileged and many people in the entertainment industry are doing. I live near the entertainment
You live
district.
in the district, yeah.
Whether one is doing the real work or they're just doing the symbolic shortcut, that's where you can debate it. But again, you can end up in the same place, and it may be genuine, which I think it may be with Erica. And it may not be genuine.
Okay, I am talking about empaths, okay?
Yeah.
Extreme empaths. I can understand how empathy would lead you to hatred through manipulation. I don't understand how it would lead you to genocidal intentions. If you are an extraordinary empath. So let me ask another question. Okay, same question, but in a different form. Why aren't these same people triggered by the atrocities of October 7th? I mean, if a picture tells 1,000 words and you see a woman with her 2 babies being ripped out of her home, trying to shield her babies as they have no idea what's going on, and men with guns are shoving her, and then she winds up in a circus paraded with her dead children. So if these people are so empathetic, how are they impervious to these kinds of atrocities?
Why didn't anybody at the Grammys say anything about Iran, which is the biggest?
Because it's not the Christ du jour, and where's the Jew? I think we talked about that. Yeah.
Right? No, it's the same thing. Yeah. It's the same thing, because now you have all of these, again, I'll just for shorthand call them networks, that these thickets that have kind of grown and connected, that on a trigger, they go off only with the designated groups that are in that network. That's one reason why.
Okay.
So, Iran is not part of that. It is going to actually create distress, internal distress for, I'm sorry, Billy, I love you, but I don't know. Okay. I'm just using you as a symbol. I've actually never really listened to her music, to be honest. But it would create, just to use her as a symbol, distress, internal distress, to be able to advocate for Iran right now.
Right.
Because it is going to you have to be in distress longer to be able to hold that, along with the distress you're already feeling for, whoever else you're feeling it for. In Billy's case, it's Palestinians and, all these other people. So now she's got to increase the distress, right? And now it is going to contradict the model that she has. So it's going to take even more cognitive resources now that she doesn't have and doesn't want to give. It's much easier shortcut to go for the symbol. And now I get temporary relief. I get lauded by people who are in my group who are doing the same thing that I'm doing. Like, hey, that's the way to go.
Okay. I'm not going to, we could move on from this subject, but I'm just going to say one more time, hatred and genocide are not the same thing. Genocide is a tremendous leap from empathetic hatred. I can hate whatever, what the Chinese are doing to the
genocide.
Uyghurs.
Genocide is not empathy at all. It's a completely different.
I agree. But what I'm saying is these people are calling for the genocide of Jews. They're calling for death to the IDF. They're calling for globalize the intifada. They're calling for jihad. They're calling for river to the sea. These are all genocidal calls. These are not just, I hate these people. These are, we need to wipe these people off the face of the earth. So, and by the way, they're not saying Netanyahu. They're not saying, you know, a specific person. Like people are like, oh, the Ayatollah. They're talking about me, and they're talking about you,
but
and
they
are not
asking this question from an integrated brain right now. The fact that you're asking this question, you know, empathy does not. It's activated by singular events. It hijacks us to focus narrowly. So we don't see things in context. That's a whole other different system.
I'm not talking about context.
No,
I'm talking about hate versus genocide.
A collective is a general. So somebody can be highly empathic. And if they saw somebody being murdered in front of them, they may be much more impacted by that than by chanting genocidal slogans, by even supporting it at the ballot box. Because that is a construction, that's a construct. It's not the same system at all. It's not in contradiction. It's only in contradiction if you're integrated in your brain, where intellectually and empathically you're integrated.
Okay.
So for you, it's a contradiction.
So empathy is, so one thing that I guess is a misconception, empathy isn't necessarily rooted in kindness.
No. It can create you to do immoral things under certain conditions,
I'm not talking,
which I can explain.
Root. We're talking about cause and effect. So empathy is not necessarily rooted in kindness.
There's nothing to do with kindness.
Okay. Well, because we tend to think of empathetic people as kind people, thoughtful people, mindful people.
Right, yeah, I mean,
no.
They can be.
Okay.
It's not, you know, it's just independent.
Okay. Okay, cool. So,
I mean, you can also actually do very cruel things when you're activated by empathy as well. You can be activated towards kindness. You can be activated towards cruelty.
Again, my question is so you're talking about effect, I'm talking about cause. You're saying that empathy can lead you to do injustices or violence.
For sure.
I'm saying if you are an empathetic person at your core, is that a kind characteristic?
No.
Not necessarily.
No.
So why is a sociopath or a psychopath someone who lacks empathy?
Well, it's by definition.
Right. Okay. Yes, it is. Okay. So let's move on, because I do have more questions I want to get into, and you're really, this is amazing. You're running out of time. I think we'll start to wrap this up. So I'm going to say his name wrong because I do every time. I think it's Gad Saad, and it was interesting because when I heard your Reichman lecture, which was 7 or 9 years ago, you talked about his concept of suicidal empathy, which I thought was new since the last 2.5 years. I was surprised to hear him talking about it all the way back then. This, for anybody who doesn't know, is a word that he coined, suicidal empathy, to describe Western support for the Islamists that actually want to see them dead. So I'm wondering, how does one become suicidally empathetic? And subconsciously, is this the ultimate act of selflessness?
Yeah, great question.
Thank you. I'm particularly proud of that one.
So, keep in mind, he is a master at being able to come up with, really great terms and being able to mock some of the ridiculous concepts that come from being in an overly emotionally activated brain. I know of no one who's able to do that better than him. And he's also
he
lived
employs
it.
humor very well too.
Yeah.
Again, like
Well, that's what
it's
the
very effective.
mockery.
Yeah.
Yeah. And staying away from mocking people, because that will not be as effective. But
Right.
to mock the ideas
Mhm.
is more effective. And suicidal empathy, it's not, a neurological, description of anything. It's something that he defined as capturing, what you described. Like, why are people doing things that are, supporting, believing, and doing actions that is going to lead to the destruction of the civilization that they're living in, and one of the better civilizations that have ever existed on the planet.
Yeah.
And so that's his question. But from a brain perspective, it's a little bit different than that. And here's where it's similar. When you are being emotionally empathic, you are letting in a representation of the other person's feeling into your body. It goes into your body before you even notice it. It goes down at that level. It's so quick. I forget how many milliseconds it is right now. I think it's under 10 milliseconds. Like, it's so quick.
Yeah.
And to do that, it overlays your own experience. If it's being done very strong at an overwhelming level, it can just knock your own experience out, and all you're feeling is the other person.
Wow.
And so this is why clinically we see these pairings of psychopaths and high empaths, right? The woman tends to be the high empath because, women are more likely to be empaths, and she marries the psychopath. And we see this pairing all the time, or at least someone who's highly narcissistic, if not full-blown psychopathic. Because what happens, it's a good pairing for the psychopath. And we may be seeing some of that on a world level now.
Yeah.
Because the psychopath, either he sees the outcome, whether he understands the process or not, that she is willing to put herself aside. Oh, he beat me again, let's say. Oh, but he had a hard day. Right? Let me just, I can feel like, I feel so bad for him.
Right.
That's the experience that dominates. Not, well, what about you? In fact, as therapists, we're all the time trying to get the woman back into what is your own state? Let's get those networks online,
Yeah.
And so you could argue, and I think, Godsad may be trying to argue this, that on a collective level, that's what many of these propaganda campaigns are trying to do. They're psychopathic campaigns, and they are trying to activate us using humanistic language so that we feel like we're good people, but we have to knock out our own experience and let in their description of the experience.
Wow. So beautifully encapsulated. Let's just wrap up with one more question that you actually started answering in the beginning, and I sort of cut you off because this is like something that I'd really like to leave people with is, how can people, particularly people who would be considered high empaths, if that's the correct term, how can they actively protect themselves from empathetic manipulation?
Yeah, that is the hardest and really central question. I think that you have to think of high empathy. It's like a portal into your brain. It's more porous than most other people if someone has high empathy. It literally is more porous. So you can feel other people more than most other people. And that portal has to be protected. And you have to do more to protect it than other people who are not as high empathy. And that means, I'm sorry to say, that means social media diets.
Oh.
You have to watch. You have to watch what you're letting into your brain. All of that imagery. You have to unplug. That is the biggest thing you can do.
We talked about how you can't fight emotions with intellect, but can educating yourself with fact help to steel you against like empathetical like vulnerability?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that you can't fight it. It's just more difficult.
Yeah.
So yeah, the more educational, just think of this again as these little thickets of,
Uh-huh.
so if you already have that formed, cognitively, you understand, let's say, if we want to use Jews as an example. So you understand Jewish history, you understand the patterns of how these things cloak themselves and come up again so that you're not fooled each generation. You understand the consequences. Like you have all of this model, it's already entrenched in the cellular structures, to be poetic, of your brain. It will serve as a bulwark when you see some of this highly emotional material. Yes, it will. The downside of this argument is that people who in their 20s or who were young, who had this whole structure formed, and then, to accept these pictures and to accept this propaganda, now it's formed in the other direction, and now it's much harder to undo. And that's where, if you want to get more bang for your buck, it's to move more to the people who don't have that yet, to some of the younger people or some of the older people than that generation. And I like, I'm not a religious person, but I love the interpretation of the story of Moses. And we're coming now to Passover shortly. And how, the interpretation is that the Jews were, wandering in the desert for 40 years because God wanted the new generation to form. Because this is the way that I look at it, with their brains having been so, formed under this thicket of slavery and how to react emotionally and how to interpret and perceive things from that slave mentality, it's too much to undo it. We just wait for them to die, and you'll go into the promised land with the younger generation that's formed in freedom.
I like. Okay, what a great place to lead into the final question.
Okay.
What does Am Yisrael Chai mean to you?
It's something in my cellular structure.
I'll take it. Orli, thank you so much for teaching me so much. I actually relish this conversation and really am so grateful to have you as a friend.
Thank you so much for, first of all, the amount of research that you did to read my writings and watch, other talks I've given and stuff like that. I'm so impressed. I'm so impressed with your questions and your passion. So thank you so much for letting me air my thoughts.
It's been amazing. We're going to sign off. And with that, I say Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
And Am Yisrael Chai.
Am Yisrael Chai.
Am Yisrael Chai. Okay, now I got to walk across the room. Am Yisrael Chai.